Thank you for joining us on WFAA Plus. I'm Mark Istrook, and the time is 11:30, and we are streaming with you this morning as rallies get underway across North Texas in protest of government policies, several, including in Dallas, Fort Worth, Arlington, and Denton. Joining those across the nation with more than 2,000 of these protests planned, all part of the so-called No Kings movement. The mobilization, a direct response to President Donald Trump's military parade in Washington, D.C., celebrating the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army and the president's 79th birthday. Now, we have so far seen protests in Frisco and Arlington earlier this morning, another one underway right now in Denton. That's where Chris Sadeghi joins us live today. And Chris, I know that you were on the ground in Frisco earlier. Now you are in Denton, as we just told our viewers. Any difference that you were seeing this morning between those two crowds?
Well, Mark, a difference in the setup, yes. In Frisco, if you saw earlier, they were lined up along the street sides, both sides with their signs, chanting, cars honking their horns. Here on the Denton County Square, they started with a rally. Speakers were up on stage talking about the purpose behind the protest, and now the people with their signs, the protesters, are making a loop around the courthouse square, but still a very similar energy and a very similar purpose. People with the same reasoning in both areas as to why they wanted to come out to voice their frustration with the government, with the administration, with the direction of the country. And here on the Denton Square, as the cars are making their ways around, they are also honking their horns. So really, in both of the spots that we've been this morning, we've seen a lot of energy. You can see the bubble makers going, just a really festive attitude, really. A lot of people cheering, a lot of people screaming, having their voices heard. Now, I will say in both Frisco and Denton, it wasn't a huge police presence, but we definitely have seen law enforcement here in Denton. They're on the square. The Denton police officers, Denton County sheriffs, they're making sure nobody is obstructing the roadways. They want these protests to remain peaceful and within the law. So we have yet to see any issues as far as the protesters getting out into the street and stopping the traffic, but there is law enforcement on hand. They are visible, but at least to this point of the morning, we have not seen any issues. Of course, these protests planned all across the country, many in North Texas. This is the second one we've been to this morning, and in each location, several hundred people out in force with their signs demonstrating peacefully so far, and you can see they're starting to get some chants going. And really, Mark, I'll tell you, people of all ages out here with their signs, with their demonstrations, and we will be following it throughout the day. We want to make sure that these protests are happening peacefully, that they are not causing any issues with the roadways. That's what law enforcement is here for, and that is why we are covering as many of these protests as we can. Mark, back to you.
Yeah, Chris, and we heard Governor Greg Abbott talk earlier this week about the law enforcement response, wanting to avoid some of the ugliness that we did see out in California, at least some of those isolated events. It feels like whatever leeway you may have during a normal protest or a normal rally, definitely not there now. He was pretty stern about the response.
Yeah, and the two that we've been to this morning, very peaceful, very orderly as well. The organizers did a good job of making sure they knew exactly what they were going to be doing. There was obviously a plan here in Denton to have the speeches on stage and then just circle the courthouse square. In Frisco earlier, they were lined up along the street sides, lots of honking, but nobody actually out in the street. I saw in Frisco, officers from Frisco, also Little Elm, posted up in the parking lots, but no issues to speak of here on the Denton County Square. As I take a look around, I don't see any right now, but I have seen them, the sheriff deputies and also the Denton police officers. So law enforcement is present. I wouldn't say it's an overwhelming presence from what we've seen, but they are present and here in case things do get out of hand.
Chris, I know that we got reports that some extremist right-wing groups like the Proud Boys may be planning counter-protests, and anytime that happens, we've seen historically how there really is the possibility for there to be some kind of a conflict and things to get pretty ugly or messy. Have you seen any counter-protests while you've been there?
Here in Denton, we saw one person, a counter-protester who was wearing a T-shirt and also a sign in support of President Trump and the administration. He was actually walking in the opposite direction, counterclockwise, from the protesters. I did notice that those officers that were here were following behind him closely, making sure that nothing got physical or there wasn't any kind of altercation. And from what we saw, we did not see any. I do not know where he went, but that is the one counter-protester we have seen to this point. But as you mentioned, we know that there were counter-protests that were planned in these protests across the country.
All right, Chris, I know you're out there in Denton. Stay safe, and we will check in with you later in just a bit. You heard Chris there reference that he has seen things be mostly festive so far in Denton and in Frisco where he was. That's what Adriana de Alba told us as well at the protest rally that she was at in Arlington. That is certainly the hope, is that things will stay calm and safe. That's what the governor has asked for. The rally in downtown Dallas is scheduled to get underway around noon. That one is happening in front of City Hall, and Rebecca Lopez has been there. Organizers are still setting up, but I know, Rebecca, we had a chance to kind of chat internally here at WFAA yesterday about police preparation, about the law enforcement response. They are concerned that things could potentially get out of hand.
Well, yeah, DPD has actually been meeting with Latino civil rights groups and activists. They've been meeting throughout the week, and one of the things that they're trying to all do is work together to keep things peacefully. LULAC came out very strongly saying, listen, you don't want the message to get lost by any kind of civil unrest, so we're going to try to keep everything very peaceful. We're still about 30 minutes away, but you can already hear people chanting, and people are streaming in. I suspect this is going to grow into the thousands of people here in front of Dallas City Hall. I'm just going to kind of pan away so you can see the crowd behind me. A lot of people carrying signs. Earlier, they were handing out signs to the crowd, and again, encouraging everybody to remain peaceful. There are actually 3 different organizations that have people here that actually petitioned the city of Dallas to protest, so they just combined all 3 here together. Now, we see right now not a lot of Dallas police officers, but trust me, Dallas police is here. They have intelligence officers, undercover officers in the crowd like they do at all of these protests, just making sure that there aren't any troublemakers. They have the command staff up at City Hall. They'll be looking down. You'll see the sharpshooters on the buildings and all of that to keep, people safe. And so right now you don't see the crime response teams and heavy SWAT gear and that kind of stuff because, they do not show like a militarized force, but that they are definitely here, and I know they're here. So back to you.
Well, that had been one of the discussions in California, that idea that the presence of an armed sense of a militarized force could provoke people. We obviously don't want to see that. I know I hear our chopper overhead. We just had that video a moment ago. But when you see all the people out there, it only takes one person to really incite things. But it seems like from what you and everyone else out there has said, things have been calm so far.
Oh, absolutely. And most of these protests, I've been covering this stuff for years, and most of the protests, they always start off like this. It's the families, it's people that are here because they have a message that they want to get across. It is a little bit later in the evening when there is more potential for issues. And I was talking to one of my Dallas police sources, and he says that in some of the other protests that we saw earlier this week in the evening, they see some of those same people show up to every protest, no matter what it is, and then they're there to cause issues, to try and get on the freeways, to start throwing things at officers. And DPD tries to hold the line. They say they want to de-escalate, but if people are trying to get on the freeway and they start throwing things at officers, you are going to get arrested and you will be taken into custody because they want to try to keep this stuff peaceful. As we know, Dallas has seen political rallies and what have you, and protests turn violent. We saw that during some of the George Floyd protests when you saw Dallas police having to lob tear gas and stun grenades, and it was quite scary at times. I was in that crowd, but right now that's nothing like that at this point. Everything is very peaceful and people just trying to get their message across.
Yeah, like you said, sometimes when it gets later on into the day, into the evening, that's when things can get a little hairy. But having heard some of the organizing calls for the No Kings movement, they definitely underscored they wanted to keep everything as peaceful as possible so that they didn't get their message obscured, kind of like we saw out of Los Angeles this week. All right, Rebecca Lopez, as she is counting down to the protest kicking off in Dallas, thank you for the update this morning. And of course, we are continuing our coverage of protests throughout the day with regular updates coming your way right here on WFAA Plus. Thanks for joining us for now. I'm Marcus Took.